Hello, this is Azadeh Zabati. Welcome to Iran, the Untold Story podcast, where I'm joined today by my guest, Farzaneh Hosseini. Farzaneh is a lawyer and a women's and human rights activist from London. Farzaneh, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Azadeh. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Farzaneh, perhaps we could start off by you giving our viewers and our listeners a brief introduction and background to yourself.
Sure. So I am an Iranian woman, born and raised in London to Iranian parents. I'm a lawyer and a human rights activist. And I grew up really kind of around the PMOI and participated in sort of events, conferences, and supported them from quite a young age to the age I am now, which isn't so young. So I'm continuing, in supporting them and in any way that I can. As an Iranian, albeit, having been born in England and, not having seen Iran, unfortunately, due to the situation there.
And Farzaneh, you've mentioned the PMOI, otherwise known as the MEK. And I wondered what your relationship is with the Iranian resistance and really how you find yourself here.
So, it really started off from a very young age. My sort of knowledge of the PMOI. My parents had been, after the revolution, they left Iran and they settled in the UK. I had members of my family who were members of the PMOI who were either in hiding at the time or they had been executed. So two of my uncles, Abbas and Gholam Hosseini, they were executed in Iran in 1981 and 1984 respectively. And in 1984, my parents fled Iran and they resettled in the UK. I was born in 1987, a few years after. I have recollections from a very young age of, my parents attending demonstrations and I was too. So it really started from that point. From a young age, I knew them very well. I had the pleasure of growing up with a young girl whose parents were and still are members of the PMOI. So it was really sort of embedded in my growing up. And then, as I got older and started sort of going to university and starting working life, I sort of made a conscious decision at that point to make it something of my own accord, of my own decision. And I've had the pleasure of, being their supporter and doing what I can since that time to basically, fight for a free Iran through the PMOI, who, in my view are, the only real opposition that are effective, that have been, really doing their utmost to bring to light the regime's crimes and atrocities and really working day and night to bring the regime to account for those atrocities.
And if I may go back to what you said, as a child, I understand, of course, under the guardianship of your parents, you will have been taken to rallies and to demonstrations and to meetings. But as an adult, Farzaneh, you have an incredibly successful professional life, a very happy personal life. And I wonder what brings you to be active in your own accord as an adult. Why would you give up your time for the people of a country you've never visited?
I think the reason why I chose my career path into the law was really because it sort of complemented me as a person. I, from a young age, I was, we it was really important for us to seek justice, and I was very outspoken at school. I was just outspoken generally around Iran and Iran issues and world politics, to the surprise of a lot of my peers at school who were not so interested in those kinds of things at the time. And that kind of led me into my profession. And it was very important for me to complement. Well, I can't really say which complements which, because I think the pursuit of justice is sort of it's in my blood. It's ingrained in me. And I think particularly as somebody who has the is able to enjoy the fruits of living in a democracy, in a free country, it's important for me to echo the voices of the people in Iran who don't have that opportunity, who don't have those freedoms. And I see it as a responsibility as an Iranian that lives in the West, in a free country, to do that. And I think it's our responsibility. I don't think it's anything less than a responsibility.
And that duty and that responsibility, as you say, comes not only from your parents, but in your experience and adult life as well. And given, Farzaneh, you have decades of knowledge and experience growing up around the Iranian resistance, do you have any particular memory that you could recall as a child or as an adult of being amongst the MEK and their supporters?
I think one of the most definitely one of the things that I'm most proud of is having had the opportunity to grow up alongside a sister who was not a biological sister, but was a child of PMOI members who, due to the situation in Iraq at the time and the war, my mother brought over to live with us in England. Growing up with her was definitely something that is I consider one of the things that I'm most proud of, and seeing her today as a member of the PMOI and having seen her not too long ago, and just seeing what an amazing woman she's become, so steadfast, so determined, and having made that choice independently, because ultimately she grew up with, amongst us, among, me and my sisters in the same environment, with the same parents, the same upbringing. But she chose a very different path, and I'm very proud of her for that. And it's yeah.
And your sister's steadfastness and determination that you speak of, that reminds me really of Mrs. Rajavi's words, "We can and we must," a phrase and a motto and a mantra that we've grown up listening to in the community. And I wondered whether those words have a particular significance for you, what those words mean to you, and also, do you have any experiences in your personal life where those words have propelled you forward to achieve something that perhaps you otherwise may not have done?
I think the words "we can" and "we must" especially resonates at the moment, now more than ever. I think, as an opposition group that is fully independent and pursuing objectives which a lot of countries in the international community don't see as being in their short-term goals, albeit they are in their long-term goals, and for the better good. I think we have seen, especially recently, a lot of roadblocks being put in our way as the resistance and as supporters of the resistance. I'm talking most recently, if I can just touch on the death of Ebrahim Raisi, which was an absolute blessing for the people of Iran, something that is a cause, and is an occasion, is occasion for joyfulness and happiness, the international community did the opposite and sent condolences to the Iranian people who had been butchered by this man, and most recently the release of Hamid Nouri, who had been convicted of crimes against humanity, being released and sent to Iran to a hero's welcome. I think a lot of people outside of this resistance would maybe be, this would be a hit to their morale. This would push them down. Whereas for us, with this leadership and with this organization and with these words, we can and we must, we actually see these roadblocks and see these sort of this policy of appeasement and all of these sort of the bad effects of these that have, that we have endured as the Iranian people and as the opposition, is actually we it's a source of more steadfastness from our side, and even more of a desire and more power to actually pursue our objectives in light of all of these conspiracies, if I can call them that, and these roadblocks and these hurdles that the international community are putting in our way. We are fortunate enough to have this organization that has been led by this remarkable woman who has overcome her own personal challenges in terms of her own relatives having been murdered by this regime, and having endured the marks and the labels that have been put on her and the organization completely unjustly, but still going strong. So we can and we must is something that has filtered down from her and from her own experiences and from her own day-to-day life. And I take inspiration from that.
Thank you. And you mentioned the determination and really overcoming such adversities. And you've given some excellent examples of what's happened during the course of the past month in terms of appeasement of the Iranian regime and concessions given to the Iranian regime. And I wondered, as somebody who is the family of the victims of the Iranian regime, given you touched upon your two uncles who were executed in the early 80s. What does the movement for justice and accountability mean to you? And is there more that can be done?
I think one of the only things really that kind of gives me hope and keeps us going as a people that have endured so much of adversity is the desire for justice and the efforts to bring about accountability. Because ultimately, I think it's very easy to feel downtrodden a lot of the time. But when you put your energies into the movement and what the movement is trying to achieve, I think it's absolutely vital that we see the long-term goal. We keep that in mind, and we continue doing what we're doing, and we actually are more energized and more incentivized by the injustices and by the appeasement to actually do more by way of whatever it is that we can do, whether it's time, whether it's financially, to keep this fight going. And for me personally, keeping the fight going means attending demonstrations that are organized by the PMOI, the campaigns that they organize. These are the only meaningful things really that are actually, in my view, going to bring about change. And I think a lot of the positive things that we've seen on the international side in terms of sanctions, in terms of the pressure that governments have been forced to apply on the Iranian regime has been as a result of the efforts of the PMOI. It was the PMOI that actually brought to the world's attention the Iran's nuclear activities and nuclear ambitions. And if it wasn't for that, it would be, we'd be in a very different place, than we are in now, in terms of the threat that the regime poses. It definitely poses a very real and dangerous threat, but that's because, unfortunately, the international community hasn't heeded on what the PMOI has been saying all along. Yeah.
And you mentioned the successes of the MEK and the resistance movement. And I wondered what role, as a very successful Iranian woman, what role you believe the leadership of the resistance movement has had. What impact has women in leadership has for you?
Well, I think the leadership is everything to any organization. And I think the fact that we have a woman leader who is a Muslim woman, and I'm not particularly religious myself, but I have huge admiration for her, huge respect for her as a Muslim woman, to be standing up to Islamic fundamentalism, and having paid the price that she has, which is essentially, her life, her time, her own, her own day-to-day life, and having seen having suffered the executions and the torture of a sister who was 8 months pregnant. I think she is really an inspiration to me as a woman, as an Iranian, in every way possible. And ultimately, the organization and the success of the organization and the achievements of the organization ultimately comes down from the leadership. It comes from the top all the way down to the bottom.
And Farzaneh, you were, of course, referring to Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. I understand that you've met Mrs. Rajavi on occasions over the years. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about meeting Mrs. Rajavi, and also what your views are on her personally.
So yes, I've had the pleasure of meeting her several times. A lot of the time it's been in huge crowds, so not really being able to speak to her personally, but I have had the opportunity to speak to her a couple of times personally. And honestly, I'm in awe of her character, of her perseverance, of her strength in light of so many adversities, both personally, having lost members of her family to the regime, and also as the leader of an organization that's, unfortunately systematically targeted by the regime, its proxies, and on occasion, some elements of the international community that are pursuing a policy of appeasement. I think she has a very difficult job. I think she does it immensely well. I'm extremely proud to be able to immerse myself in an organization which she leads, as a woman, as a Muslim woman, and it's incredible. It's absolutely it's incredible, really.
And that, I suppose, triumph over adversity, given that she has experienced so much in terms of her own family, only speaks of the empathy that she has with the victims and their families and the survivors of rights violations. You are an educated, independent Iranian woman. I should imagine that you have perused Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan for a future Iran. I wonder what your views are on her roadmap for Iran's future. And also, Farzaneh, do you view the NCRI as a viable alternative to the Iranian regime?
Starting just on touching on the 10-point plan, I think it's very easy for people to say what they don't want, what is wrong, and but not really having a vision for the future. The 10-point plan is a very, very clear manifesto. It's something which is all-encompassing in terms of what we need to see in a future Iran. And I think it's really important that that Mrs. Rajavi has set out this 10-point plan, which has been actually it's been there for a very, very long time. So it's not a case of simply opposition to the Iranian regime. It's actually there is a plan for the future, which is based on human rights, dignity, freedoms, women's rights, all those things that we I suppose we take for granted living in the West. I think it's really important to me personally to see those things in black and white so that we know what a future Iran will and should look like.
Farzaneh, I'm glad that you actually raised the fact that Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan, was written a great many years ago and isn't a manifesto that's been put together, dare I say, since it's become fashionable to be an opposition to the Iranian regime. And that 10-point plan has always been available, and it's clear and it's transparent. I wondered whether there are particular values that you have seen in the Iranian resistance movement that make you such a vocal and passionate supporter of the movement.
I think for several decades now, I've witnessed sheer selflessness of these people, of the leadership of the organization, which consists of its members as well as its supporters, of which I'm proud to call myself a supporter. It really is quite remarkable the sacrifices that these people have made, and we're talking about absolutely everything. In the case of the members of the PMOI, who literally day and night are busy with their activities to shed light on the atrocities that are happening in Iran, to bring about accountability, to bring about justice. In terms of values, the fact that we have a remarkable woman leader who is herself a Muslim woman, but whose organization has utmost respect of people from all walks of life, secular women such as myself, to the more religious, the respect that they have for people on the left of the spectrum, on the right of the spectrum. It really goes beyond that. It's an organization that's fighting for all of us on the basis of its principles, which is that we need to bring about a free Iran that respects people from all walks of life, whether they're religious, irreligious, whatever sort of side of the political spectrum they sit on, and to respect the dignity of people and their choices, whether it's personal choices or otherwise. These are values which, for me, as a woman that has been fortunate enough to grow up in the West, I hold absolutely sacrosanct. Is the reason why I support this organization, because I've seen it, I've felt it, and I support it.
Farzaneh, you mentioned your adoptive sisters, and I understand that they were two of some 900 children that were evacuated from Camp Ashraf at the onset of the first Gulf War in Iraq. in what really was a truly extraordinary humanitarian feat. And recently, the Iranian regime has attempted to hijack this issue in its propaganda war against the MEK. Given that this story involves your two sisters and it's so personal to you, I wonder, how does this make you feel?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to put into words. I mean, it's a massive insult to the intelligence of anyone that knows anything about these children. These children were evacuated, unfortunately, had to be evacuated at a time when their lives were in grave danger. And to paint it as anything other than that, as a forced separation or otherwise, is really a gross misrepresentation of the reality. I was just a child when these two amazing girls joined our family. And, you know, I saw with my very own eyes and I experienced the fact that they were given the exact same upbringing as my biological sisters and I. They were raised by the same parents in the same manner, with the same schools, with the same extracurricular activities. And one decided to join the PMOI, and the other did not. And she's living a very happy private life in Europe, albeit she still supports the organization. So I think my own experience and this example of my family actually really discredits and flies in the face of this narrative that the Iranian regime and its supporters are really propagating in relation to these children. These children were, their lives were in danger, and there was no option but to either keep them there and for them to most probably be killed or at best injured, or for them to move to safe countries, which is exactly what the organization did. And they did it very well, because not a single one of those children was harmed in the process. I think to portray this this humanitarian effort to take those children to safety as anything other than that only goes to serve the Iranian regime's narrative. It's propagated by the Iranian regime that the PMOI is bad. I know myself, I grew up with these people. I grew up surrounded by the organization. I grew up with two of their children, who I'm proud to call my sisters, and who live very different lives. One is in Albania as a member of the PMOI, and the other lives in Europe, as I said. It really is an insult to, their own intelligence, these children. It's an insult to them and that the choices that they've made, which have been very different choices, I should add, if not highlighted by the fact that the very people in these documentaries actually are living in the West, are living in European countries. And it's an insult to the families that raised those children, families such as mine, who did it with love and with care and with their best interests at mind. So I think, and I think it's really important also to mention at this point that, it's important to remember that actually people that have taken children from areas or countries where they are in danger to safety, Nicholas Winton being one of them, who transported, I think, 669 Jewish children from Nazi Germany to safety, was actually knighted by Queen Elizabeth for services to humanity. So how is it that when it comes to the PMOI, and these children, that the PMOI are criticized for taking those children to safety. I mean, it's beyond me. It boggles my mind, and I absolutely think it's imperative that we highlight, that these are unfounded allegations. They're lies. They're driven by a smear campaign against the PMOI, which is a campaign that has been taken so many forms over so many years. I mean, it's honestly, it's just to the point where now it's really quite boring. But it is offensive to me as somebody who is, whose sisters are two of these children of Camp Ashraf, who I adore and who chose very different paths, and whose decisions were respected by everyone around them, including their parents, who are members of the PMOI. So yeah, I think it's really something that I feel very strongly about.
And as you say, it's very much a smear campaign against the Iranian resistance. And whilst it is repetitive and monotonous, and as you say, really somewhat boring, there are consequences to that. And of course, as you say, it's very personal to you, given that you lived with your sisters, and it's a representation of their lives.
Yes, indeed. And I think the timing as well of the release of this documentary, if I can call it that. I mean, a documentary is supposed to be based on facts, so I can't really call it that. I don't know what else to call it. But the timing of the release, the timing of the broadcast of the so-called documentary in Sweden, this recent exchange of prisoners that took place, of Hamid Nouri with two Swedish nationals in Sweden. I mean, none of this is a coincidence. So I think it's really important to highlight and speak out. And I'm sure that anybody that has an ounce of common sense and actually looks into the facts will realize that this is nonsense. And I certainly will be doing what I can to tell our story as a family, and tell the truth about the children of Camp Ashraf, which I experienced personally.
And Farzaneh, finally, may I ask you to leave our listeners and viewers with 3 adjectives that to you best describe the movement, and also why you choose those words.
So I think it's very difficult to whittle the adjectives down to 3, but I will try. I think the first one, unapologetically faithful, faithful to their principles, doing everything that it takes in light of all adversities to bring about freedom and democracy to Iran. That's my first one. I think the second would be endurance. Again, touching on adversities, appeasement. It is remarkable that we are seeing today this organization, which is stronger than it's ever been. It's been fighting for not 1, 2, 3, 4 decades. It's been fighting for longer than that. It has been systematically targeted by the regime to the point where there have been mass executions of its members and supporters in the hope that it would eradicate this organization. It's still there, and it's there stronger than ever, and it's there with members and supporters that are more determined than ever, and that actually take a lot of take the downfalls and the hurdles and actually translate them into a much more meaningful and more powerful struggle. That would be my second. Third, and again, I think this is one of the most remarkable things about them is the sheer selflessness and the sacrifices that they have made. I might, if I can, just draw on my own personal experience when I talk about selflessness here. I am the niece of a member of the PMOI by the name of Hosseini, my aunt, my father's sister, who was very, very young at the time of the revolution, and she joined the PMOI. I'm not sure if it was pre the revolution or after the revolution. It was way before my time. But she is a woman that joined the organization that was disseminating newsletters and leaflets. And she was arrested, and she spent several years in prison in the Iranian regime's prisons for her political activities. And when she was released, instead of going on about her normal life, she joined the PMOI, the PMOI's military base in Iraq, and spent the rest of her life there, having sacrificed her personal life and all the joys that come with living a normal private life, and up to the very end. And she was one of the 52 martyrs of the PMOI that were killed at point blank range in Camp Ashraf in September 2013, where the Iranian regime, through its proxies in Iraq, had entered Camp Ashraf and mass executed these people. So she was a woman really that never really had a private life. She always was fighting. So for me, she really is a source of inspiration. And when I talk about selflessness, I think of her as among all of the members of the PMOI. They're a huge source of inspiration and actually a huge source of positivity in my life, because I think it's very easy for Iranians to, whether or not they're very politically active in the West, I think it's very easy to sort of, become quite disillusioned by things that are happening. But for me, it's quite the opposite. I really take a lot of courage. I take a lot of strength. There's not really much that can bother me, or in my own personal life even. I suppose it kind of filters down to that. So yeah, they are just truly an inspiration to me from so many angles, and I'm so blessed to be a part of the movement and to be a supporter of them.
3 really wonderful adjectives, Farzaneh, and also I really appreciate you sharing the story of your aunt, a very personal story and an emotional one, and I'm sure she would be exceptionally proud of you. Farzaneh Hosseini, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Azadeh. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.